Well, first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to IISS for the invitation, and also to the Colombian government for hosting this very interesting, important gathering. My predecessors talked about a lot of creative and grandeur ideas about the relationship, but I'd rather talk about a little bit what Japan would expect from the alliance and how Japan can be relevant to this alliance. First, I'd like to start by saying that how much importance we attach to this alliance. Actually, I arrived from Bogota after a week of talks with my Colombian friends in the 10th round of negotiations for the Japan-Colombia Economic Partnership Agreement. And the Economic Partnership Agreement is a FTA. When this negotiation is concluded, Japan will have EPAs with all of the Pacific Alliance members. As a matter of fact, Japan has followed closely the Pacific Alliance since its inception as one of the first observers. Keidanren, on the other hand, Japan's influential business organization, has also set up a task force on the Pacific Alliance. And political level, last summer, Prime Minister Abe visited Colombia shortly after the President Santos was re-elected. He also visited Mexico and Chile in the same trip, and he also had another meeting with President Humala of Peru a couple of months later. In this trip, Prime Minister Abe was accompanied by a delegation of 250 businessmen, including 70 CEOs. The Japanese business community has its eyes set on this region. Of course, we have talked a lot about how Pacific Alliance is attractive, but I'd like to repeat some points. The Pacific Alliance draws considerable attention for a number of economic factors, vast potential for economic growth, which every one of the member countries has already been demonstrating, the size of its combined economy, which is equivalent to ASEAN's as a whole, and of course, a wide array of natural resources, and perhaps human resources. That said, for the Pacific Alliance to realize its full potential, it also has to deal with a number of economic challenges. Japan could contribute in these endeavors in some ways. But anyway, among them, I'd like to cite three main challenges. One of them is to diversify its production base by increasing competitiveness of the manufacturing industry. The recent decline in resource prices has a certain adverse effect on the region's economy, but it also means a great opportunity, I think. Japan has a long history of investment in the manufacturing industry in Latin America. For example, Nissan Mexico has started operation since the late 1950s. More often than not, such investments have been made with a long-term perspective. They have created fair employment and provided adequate training. They have nurtured amicable relations with the local communities. However, I have to say, while China is getting bigger and bigger and more grander and getting more important, while somehow or other in the recent decades, Japanese investment in Latin America has remained at rather a decent level, below its probably full potential. For example, in the Pacific Alliance countries combined, we still count approximately 1,000 Japanese firms established. On the other hand, for example, in Thailand alone, we have more than 1,500 Japanese companies. So we still have a good room for development. Japanese firms may have been less active due to the lost decade in Latin America, a decade most characterized by political instability and exorbitant foreign debts, and also followed by Japan's lost decades, which started 1990s. But now things are getting different. Abenomics, what so-called Abenomics, is bearing fruit. The Japanese economy has begun to pick up once again. In fact, last October, we counted more than 800 Japanese companies just in Mexico, which is actually twice the number of 2009. The most salient increase was observed in the automotive sector, including supporting industries. Now, more than ever, Japanese firms are producing and purchasing parts on the ground. Therefore, instead of depending on imports, not depending on imports. So I would say that we can expect this upward trend in investment to maintain itself, if not accelerate, for time to come. The second challenge is to improve the region's production capacity by creating value chains that are integrated into the global value chains. For that purpose, several efforts should be made. Improving logistics with appropriately developed infrastructure, enhancing both inter-regional and intra-regional connectivity, developing competitive logistics service, facilitating trade, and well, this is some, number of my predecessors have touched upon, harmonizing trade and investment-related regulations. It is also getting more and more important to strengthen small and medium-sized enterprises. Japan has experience in these areas. For example, in ASEAN, Japan has a number of projects together with ASEAN members to support its connectivity through, for example, by conducting harmonizations of the regulations, by assisting the maintenance of land and maritime infrastructure, and by providing adequate trading. I would mention in this respect, last month, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry conducted seminars here in Colombia and in Mexico on how a master plan on the Pacific Alliance infrastructure could be explored with the Alliance members. The discussion on the master plan is expected to be furthered. The third challenge is raising productivity and enhancing technological capacity to produce value-added goods. For that purpose, education and training count a great deal. It is our task to create for the younger generation a brighter future. Japan can work with the Pacific Alliance here as well. Japan's universities are active in the area of research and development, and they are working increasingly on industry-university joint research. The University of Tokyo, for example, held so-called University of Tokyo Forum with the Catholic University of Chile and other universities in 2013. Almost 80 universities gathered for the second Japan-Mexico Universities Dean Conference last year. Japanese universities are also interested in recruiting more students from the region to study in Japan. Of course, these economic factors I have just taken up premises that the society is equipped with the predictability, which gives economic players confidence and security to engage in sound business activities. This, needless to say, requires the rule of law. On that, the rule of law which is fair and clear for all. The people of the Pacific Alliance countries have over decades developed democracies and implemented steadily the rule of law. Upon that foundation, they have nurtured market-based economies. Therefore, with good prospects for further growth and political stability. I'm convinced that this also constitutes a viable base for us to work together, hand in hand, to build a resilient and sustainable economy. As the Pacific Alliance aims to strengthen ties with Asia, the Pacific Ocean connects us together. Here, let me quote what Prime Minister Abe stated in his speech at the last year's Shangri-La Dialogue. Quote, "Today, the benefits for each of us lie in the seas from the Pacific to the Indian Oceans, being made thoroughly open as a place of freedom and peace. All of us should find one common benefit in keeping our oceans and skies as global commons, where the rule of law is respected throughout to the merit of the world and humankind." End of quote. The Pacific Alliance becomes fully Pacific when connecting with Asia. Japan can be a willing and useful partner in achieving this endeavor. And Prime Minister Abe also called for, during his tour to this region last year, progresar juntos, liderar juntos, inspirar juntos. Thank you very much.